Good evening, and welcome to the City of Port Washington Mayoral Candidate Forum. This forum is taking place in the Port Washington City Hall Council chambers and being broadcast on the city's cable and YouTube channel. It is also being recorded on Tuesday, March 10th, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock p.m. The recording will not be edited and will be posted in its entirety to the City of Port Washington's YouTube channel. Please share the recording link with other voters in the City of Port Washington. Tonight's forum is co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Ozaukee County and the W.J. Niederkorn Library in Port Washington. My name is Ellen McFarlane. I am a member of the League of Women Voters of Ozaukee County. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. It does not endorse or oppose candidates or political parties. The opinions expressed by the candidates are theirs alone. We have both mayor candidates participating in tonight's forum. The names of these two candidates will appear on the ballot on April 6th for City of Port Washington voters. City mayor is a nonpartisan position. Please become informed about your entire ballot and vote in this upcoming election. Questions for this forum were solicited from the public ahead of time via drop boxes located at Port Washington City Hall and W.J. Niederkorn Library and an online submission form. Questions were sorted and combined into categories and themes by members of the co-sponsoring organizations. Only questions relevant to the mayor position were accepted. We will get through as many questions as we can within the allotted time for this forum. This is a forum, not a debate. As such, candidates will address the questions posed by the audience. In response to the COVID pandemic, we are following CDC guidelines and the policies set by the Common Council. I would now like to introduce the participants of this evening's forum. I'll introduce them in the order that we determined by a coin toss when they arrived tonight. Dan Benning and Ted Knightsky. This is the format we will use for tonight's forum. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to make an opening statement. They will make their opening statements in the order determined before we began tonight. League member Mary Fran LaPesca will be the timekeeper. The opening statements will be followed by responses to the written questions submitted by the public. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to questions. Each candidate will respond to all questions. After the question period, candidates will have 2 minutes to summarize their positions on issues in a closing statement. Both of these candidates have chosen to make the effort to run for elected office. As a consequence, they are subjecting themselves to the scrutiny of the voters. Whatever you may think of each candidate's position on issues, they deserve our respect for their willingness to serve in public office. We will now begin with the opening statements from each candidate. Since Dan Benning won the coin toss, he will give the first opening statement.
Good evening, everyone. I wanted to share a little bit about myself and my background. I grew up in upstate New York and graduated from Cornell University. I'm married with 2 grown children. My first job out of college was with J.I. Case in Racine, where I spent 5 years working there. I then moved to Michigan to work for Johnson Controls. We moved back to Wisconsin and to Port Washington in 2008 due to a job transfer. After 30 years as an IT executive with Johnson Controls, I was retired in 2019, following the outsourcing of our IT department. I've been honored to spend the last 3 years representing Ward 4 on the City Council. I'm a founding board member of our Lighthouse Youth Ministry, a youth ministry partnership of 5 local congregations. Besides my work with our city departments, I work part-time at Ernest C. Funeral Homes, and I also have a little bit of fun setting up and shooting fireworks shows professionally. My goals as your manager are to focus on managed development and growth based on our vision for Port Washington's future, The growth of city services with a new fire EMS facility, and by leveraging technology to make our operations more efficient and effective. Improving communications, working with city staff on a redesign of our website, and providing regular updates to the community. And one of the most important things to me is setting the city up to be the benchmark for our focus on diversity and inclusion in city operations programs. And lastly, nurture partnership with other communities and organizations. Thank you.
Ted?
Thank you. Thank you. I first wanted to start by thanking the League of Women Voters and the Niederkorn Library Group for putting on this forum tonight. The very first time I was ever in this room was in 1989 when my 5 high school social studies teachers from Port Washington High School chose me and 3 of my friends to be and participate in Youth and Government Day with the American Legion. And I remember here when the mayor, the room was a little different at the time, but the mayor had told us that everyone, if you live in a community and stay in that community, you have a duty to serve your community. And those his voice and those of the Legion and the other people who participate in things like this, that echoes with me. I'm running because I love Port Washington. I am not running because I'm upset about something. I have lived my entire life here. I married Megan Matera in 1997 at St. Mary's Church, and we have 2 children, Charlie Knightsky and Grace Knightsky, one in the high school and one a graduate of Port High. I am very proud as I work across the state of Wisconsin to tell people where I am from because I love our resources and I love what we do here. I've got 20 years of leadership experience at an executive level, managing budgets in the millions of dollars and working with large groups of people and making sure that we collaborate. In my current job at CISA 6, I oversee the education of hundreds of thousands of kids across the state and support different collaborations and opportunities, and I bring those skills back here to Port Washington, where I have lived and served my entire life. I'm a son of Port Washington and proud of what we do here and excited to help move the city with a strong vision of strategy, leadership, accountability, and process into the renaissance that we are currently experiencing as a city.
Thank you. Now for the questions coming from the community. Ted, you'll be the first to respond to the first question. What is your vision for our city?
Well, that's a great question. So what my vision for Port Washington is, I just stated, is we're living in a renaissance. You know, having lived here, grown up here, gone to school here through the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, et cetera. Even when I was in college, I stayed living in Port Washington. And I think my vision for Port Washington is to see us become a premier destination, not just in Wisconsin or the region, but in the nation. I think Port Washington has resources that we need to leverage. And my vision would be that we spend a lot of time being very strategic, making sure that we engage all of the community members at every level, and we work to make sure that we are a destination to live, invest, own a business, maintain a business, employ people, but most importantly, that we are a safe community that people will come to because they know that we are safe in all areas. And as Dad pointed out, the work that they're currently doing on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee is something that we would work, that I would continue to, and if I'm not elected, I hope they would allow me to work with them and to advance those pieces. But my vision for Port Washington is that we have balanced development, strong zoning practices, but most importantly, we're a place where you want to live.
Thank you. Dan, you have 1 minute. Same question.
So my vision for Port Washington is to continue our development, continue our growth in the city, but we need to do that in a managed manner and make sure that growth is done in a way that supports the needs of the community, a mix of housing opportunities. We've got a lot of great new developments coming into our area, and we've got a lot of opportunities in the north side and the west side and even in the south side for some future developments. And I'd like to have a vision for that as we go forwards. I know in talking to folks that have come to the city like myself, they love the city, they love what the opportunities are there for us, and I'd like to make sure we continue to do that. I'd also like to make sure that as a city, we're doing things in the most economic way possible as we provide services to our community. Thank you.
Next question, we'll be starting with you, Dan.
Okay.
How does the mayor impact city government as a non-voting member of the city council?
That's a good question. Mayor Marty and I have had a number of discussions about that. I think the mayor, as a non-voting member, really has the opportunity, though, to work with the city staff to make sure we're bringing forward what his vision is, and to challenge the council, to make sure that my ideas are brought forwards, to make sure that those things I'd like to see done are there. So it's really to challenge city staff, to challenge the council, to make sure that the initiatives that are put forward are in the best interest of Port and its citizens. Thank you.
Ted.
So I believe that the role of the mayor, and I think Mayor Becker's done a very good job of this, is to truly be the ambassador for the community, to be the connection back to the council of what the entire community is thinking and saying, and working really closely to support the city administration and the department heads. I think one of the great roles of a mayor in a part-time role like Port Washington is really to be the charge and energy behind the strategies and the processes, going out there, meeting with developers, being like the chief of customer service for the community, making sure that we're engaging stakeholders, making sure that neighborhoods are not surprised by anything, and really, again, collaborating with the council. I was on the council in the 90s and served as city council president when I was on the council, and one of the things was working with both Mayor Dean and Mayor Gottlieb during those time periods. I observed them working very closely with city administration and advocating, during those different pieces. And while the council and the hierarchy that's in the budget demonstrates, very clearly their roles, I still believe that the mayor's job is to be the key ambassador for the community and the liaison between City Hall and the citizens.
Each mayor over the years reflected different styles of leadership. What kind of mayor will you be? What would be your style of leadership? Ted?
Thank you. So I would say that I'm a servant leader. When we meet with the community members and we talk to stakeholders and we decide what we want to be as we move forward through this great renaissance of Port Washington, my job as mayor would be to serve the community. And then where they wanted to go, my job would be to work with people to get the resources, to provide the leadership, and support the city administrators and the department leads to make sure that we get there. The community should determine where we head, and the council and the different commissions and stakeholders should also be participating, but in that defined vision. We should not be in a position where the mayor or anyone is in a spot where they don't know where they are. So I believe in true servant leadership, and what that means is I will serve the needs of the community above self. We will work to make sure Port Washington is a destination and ensure that both myself as well as the council, if I'm fortunate enough to get into this position, collaborate at every opportunity to be a great benefit to the members of our city.
And I like Ted said too, I spent 30 years as a servant leader in many different organizations when I was in the working world. And I do believe that you need to listen and you need to set the vision and set the guidance for how your team is going to work and what they're going to be focused on and what they're going to get done. I've enjoyed the opportunity to work with Tony Brown, our city administrator, as we've visioned our next steps and what our goals are going to be for the future. My leadership style is to listen, but then to be the advocate for those in the community that I represent, and to work with those in the city staff that need a conduit to the council. Again, as a non-voting member, that is my goal, and that is my role, to be that conduit between the community and the staff and the council.
All right, Dan, you'll be answering this question first. As a mayor, what are your plans to get a pulse on the different departments of the city?
Well, as a mayor, I would continue what I do today, which is go spend time in each of the departments. Being relatively new to city government, especially in Port Washington 3 years ago, I've spent a lot of time working with the different department heads and their teams and kind of walking in their shoes in the day in the life type of thing. I've had an opportunity to work closely with a lot of our departments here in City Hall, bringing some of my IT expertise to that. But I've also had a great opportunity to work with our Park and Rec department, our street department, our water plant, wastewater plant, library, just everybody. And I find that to learn the most and to understand the most is to go where they work and hear what they do. And that includes going out in the street and talking to them, especially with our road crews. So that's kind of where my connection comes in.
Thank you. Ted?
That's a great answer, Dan. I think, and one of the pieces where I think is critical for the mayor with the department heads is first to lead through the city administrator with Tony Brown and his good leadership that he's providing the city of Port Washington. And I think one of the other things that I learned when I was in college, I worked for the Park and Rec department, cutting the grass in the parks and doing landscaping. And I learned from a very wise man there named Joe Weiss that what was critical was the relationships between City Hall, the department heads, and back with the crews and the staff. And I think our job as mayor is, again, to work with city administration, but get in front of those department leaders and hear from them. And what are your needs and what can we do and how can we advocate? And like Dan, I've been fortunate, not the last 3 years, but meeting with department heads and talking to them. You know, I've got some concerns about how we can advocate for different safety measures, et cetera. And I believe in taking the problem to the problem. And one of the first things I would do is meet with the different department heads, but take them of a walk of the community that I grew up in so they could see it through the eyes of the people who aren't in it all day long. Thank you.
All right, Ted, you'll be starting on this question. How do you intend to communicate with the residents of Port Washington? Please be specific in how you would do that.
Well, first, one of the things I want to do is I want to create a mayor stakeholder team. So what I would do is I would engage in the community and ask different members of our community, both children, middle school, high school students, younger adults, seasoned citizens, business owners, different people who are in town and have different pieces, and just meet with them on a frequent, by every other month basis, and bring to them, hey, the city is considering this. What do you think? I believe in proactive strategies and making sure the community knows exactly what's going to happen. And one of the things I think that creates a division between our citizens and the city is that they're often surprised. So today on my Facebook page, I posted that one of the things I would do is I'd approach the Ozaki Press and ask to have a monthly mayoral column where we forecast what the work of the city is going to be the next month so that we can provide the opportunity for people to engage. I would also create different opportunities, through social media and different pieces. But I think one of the things that I would ask the city to look at is a key performance indicator around customer service and collecting from people who engage with the city their level of satisfaction with those services.
Dan?
So similar to Ted, but a little bit different. I've what you're watching this forum on today was a lot of new technology that I rolled my sleeves up and worked with city staff and our vendor to help implement this technology. My role really was in doing the documentation and training and testing and making sure it works. And I saw the need, worked with our city administrator to make sure that we had the technology updated because it was antiquated and not working. We'd like to get the website updated. And we'd also like to I'd like to see us putting out probably a monthly update, to the community of what's going on, what's coming up. The other thing that I think we need to do a better job at, and again, tell them 10 times, 10 different ways, is helping our constituents understand that our meetings are open and there's an opportunity for public comment and that they are encouraged to attend and provide input. Thank you.
All right, Dan, this next question comes to you. As mayor, how would you encourage and help facilitate greater diversity and inclusion in our city?
Well, the first thing I did is after last summer, we had a challenging summer with the protests and the counter protests and all that went with that. And it weighed heavily on me. So in September, I came to the council and asked that they sponsor a diversity and inclusion committee. That was done. with full support of the council. And that committee has started meeting, and the goals are published out there. I believe, and I've seen this in my work life over a number of years, that by helping to bring in a diverse organization, not just based on color, but based on religion, education, that we have a better organization. We understand and we have better ideas coming forwards. And I absolutely think that we need to move that forward. And my goal is to someday, sooner than later, to have Port Washington be recognized as a city that's diverse and inclusive in how we operate. Thanks.
Ted, you have 1 minute.
All right, thank you. So I've dedicated my life to this topic, going all the way back to the 90s when I was in college and got elected to student government and created different offices and different pieces to encourage, advocacy for different groups. And one of the things I believe is that the city needs to start by honoring the diversity that exists and growing off of that. I was up at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire about 2 weeks ago. I sit on the state's racial disparity task force through the state assembly. And I was impressed by the very first thing that the chancellor of the university did was he started by honoring the indigenous peoples who had inhabited the lands of which the university sat upon. And where Dan and I and everyone else is sitting tonight, these were indigenous peoples' properties first. Then I believe that's very, very important for us to look at strategies to draw in and create networks so that we can attract diversity and inclusion into our city. One of the things I've done is we've now joined 4 different chambers of commerce across the state, and I would encourage the city to do the same. We're in the Wisconsin Black Chamber of Commerce, the Wisconsin Hmong Chamber of Commerce, the Latino Chamber of Commerce, and, well, my time's up. So that's what I would do. I can tell you the 4th one on my Facebook page tonight.
Thank you. Ted, what is your response to the Black Lives Matter protests and counter-protests that took place here last summer? Do you think racism is a problem in Port Washington?
I think racism is a problem systemically across our country, and I think Port Washington and Wisconsin has micro versions of that every single day. I think Black Lives Matter. I think that one of the things is I have a podcast, and I interviewed a gentleman, and we had what was called the Positively Uncomfortable Conversation. And one of the questions I asked him, he's an African-American professor at Marion University in Fond du Lac, lives in Milwaukee area. And I asked him, why do Black Lives Matter? And he changed my whole mindset and perspective. And he said, Black Lives Matter because your life, Ted, as a white person has always mattered. And that shifted my perspective and really kind of fueled my advocacy. Again, I don't draw a line between who we're advocating for, et cetera. But the idea that it is time for us as a nation and a community to start to stand up and support everyone, and specifically put in place processes and practices to ensure that we are a safe community that's not just safe, but welcoming.
Dan?
So Black Lives Matter, again, as I alluded to, we had the demonstrations last summer, and they turned into some counter-protests that occurred, and things were not good, and that weighed on me. I would like to see, again, as I said before, having our city respect and celebrate inclusiveness of a diverse community. Is there racism in our community? Yes, there is racism. But there are other forms of distrust of one another based on other factors and characteristics, and I think we need to get beyond that in this world. I think, unfortunately, our global or national politics have really strained that in the past year. But I do believe that what we are attempting to do with our diversity and inclusion committee and the actions there will help.
Dan, what do you suggest be done to encourage better mask mandate compliance, at least at local downtown businesses?
Oh, that's a tough one. Unfortunately, we have not had a clear direction from our county and our state on the value of masks. I personally believe that masks have made a significant difference in minimizing the impact of the COVID virus in our community. I have encouraged and here within the city facilities, we're requiring masks to be worn. I don't believe that, there is a effective way of requiring or ordering masks in the democracy that we live in today. People have a choice. I may not agree with it, but I would strongly encourage it, and I continue to strongly encourage it, whether it's in the city operations, the funeral home where I work, or the church where I participate.
Ted?
Yeah, I agree with Dan. I mean, this is really a county-wide health department issue and mandate from the state of Wisconsin. And as Dan said, we live in a nation where people enjoy their individual liberties, and the mask is viewed by some people as a affront to those liberties. I think when you go to local restaurants and different places, we all get to make a choice as we enter those different environments and businesses, and we decide, through our capitalism, if we're going to engage or not. And if they don't wear masks in their business and that makes us uncomfortable, then we don't go in there. And I don't think it's the role of the city government to enforce the mask mandate while I wear my mask all the time and everywhere. Again, that's a county issue, directed from the state to the county through the county health department.
Ted, I'm going to give a little context to this next question. Neighboring cities Grafton and Saukville have been able to attract significant investment from larger businesses like Costco, Target, Walgreens, Starbucks, etc., which then contributes to businesses of all sizes investing and opening as well. Why have these cities been successful, and what can Port do to similarly be successful?
Well, somewhere along the line back in the 50s, somebody decided to move the interstate way out west. And as a result, with that corridor over there, that's really the hub of the shopping pieces. I think where Port Washington has the opportunity through the current leadership at the city level is to cast a strong vision, to create zoning guidelines that just demonstrate where we would want commercial and different property balances. Saukville was very aggressive in their development of their manufacturing zones and the manufacturing parks, the industrial park on the west side of town. And I think Port Washington has that opportunity. We have vacant manufacturing spots. We have the opportunity to both move to the north, closer to the interstate, potentially put water across I-43 and to the south. But as far as the development, I think Port Washington has a beautiful opportunity to work with Saukville on the Highway 33 corridor to really put together a beautiful entrance that joins our two communities. Like a Mequon-Thiensville, where Port Washington and Saukville will eventually grow together. And I think having a strong vision around that will do that. Past vision pieces, we can't go backwards, we can only go forward.
Dan.
Yeah, and I agree with Ted. I think that the location of I-43 to our west really drew the big box stores and some of those businesses in there. I believe that Port Washington has an advantage in being next to the lake and focusing on more niche businesses, on restaurants, and entertainment venues like that. Because of the lake and the views of the lake, I think there's opportunities for development, for folks to come and work here or live here. I think we're seeing in the demographics data that a lot of the folks that are coming to our community are those that are still commuting to Sheboygan or to Milwaukee. But they're getting to that age where they're looking for their forever home, and they love what they see in Port Washington. So I think we've got to leverage that. I do believe, though, that we have some opportunities in our former industrial areas for some significant redevelopment, and that's an opportunity for us going forwards.
Dan, this gets a little more specific. What can Port do to address vacant and underutilized manufacturing space to bring in new businesses and create jobs?
If you were to talk to our city planner and city administrator, they tell you they have regular conversations with some of those folks. Some of those folks have brought forward some ideas that, quite honestly, weren't very attractive to Port and just didn't fit. Whether it didn't fit within our zoning or our vision or comprehensive plan for that part of the area. So it's finding the right business, building owner, facility owner, right developer that's going to bring forward something that is going to be attractive and enhance our community as we go forwards. But our city planner meets regularly with some of those owners of those facilities in places like the old former Simplicity plant on a regular basis.
Ted?
So I believe what we need to do is become very aggressive in our zoning. I think, again, through strategy and a strategic plan, we need to clearly identify the sites. We need to zone them appropriately. We need to work with the economic development corporations in the region as well as the state. Make those shovel-ready sites that we can then go after aggressively and attract manufacturers and investment bankers and different people who want to move a business to a community. Obviously, Port Washington is a pretty easy sell in a lot of different manners. But as far as bringing back manufacturing or development onto those sites, having a very clear vision for that, I think is important. I think the city has the opportunity to aggressively go out there and market what we have instead of sitting and waiting for the right person to come along. I believe we owe it to our citizens in our community to create that infrastructure and opportunities for those sites to be taken up again so that the tax base is impacted and we all have the opportunity to benefit. We get one good, large manufacturer in town again, this city sparks with supply chain, transportation, warehousing, and all of those pieces, and that would be something I'd push very aggressively for.
Ted, what is your position on attracting tourist ships to Port Washington? You look puzzled.
Well, I don't know there were tourist ships on Lake Michigan, but well, if we have the opportunity to bring people in to support our downtown, we should take it. And I guess where I would twist that a little bit is Port Washington is in this amazing spot. We have River Edge to the west. We've got Harrington Beach to the north. We've got an urban center to the south, all 10, 15, 20-minute rides. You can get to some of the greatest museums in the country. You can get to some of the greatest Great Lakes beaches in the country. You can get to some of the greatest forests in the state. And if we could become a port for that, that would be really interesting. That's something I had never heard. That's why I gave you the puzzled look. Having traveled out east and seeing gigantic cruise ships create a shadow on a community, I don't know how I'd feel if Carnival Cruise Lines were to do something like that. But I will work hard as an ambassador to make Port Washington a place so that we can drive the revenues for small local businesses so they can sustain through the winter.
Dan.
So I'm going to assume that they're talking about some of the smaller cruise ships that do ply the Lake Michigan waters. When I lived in Michigan, I lived in Holland, Michigan, which was visited by some of those cruise ships. There's pros and cons to this. I mean, when a cruise ship comes in there, they require a lot of things that we don't necessarily have. It's not just docking; it's loading supplies, unloading supplies, things like that. But it also, we're not a tourist destination, I guess. There's not a indigenous village to go visit or something that's within relatively short distance. So I have mixed feelings. I do like the idea of somebody coming in and having day cruises or something like that. I know we've tried that with a couple of different boats in the past, and we've had the Dennis Sullivan. Unfortunately, Dennis Sullivan is not in good shape right now, so we don't expect it back. But yeah, there's pros and cons.
Dan, I'm going to provide a little context to this question as well. This question comes from a resident who believes that there are many questions that have gone unanswered by the Lighthouse Committee about the Art Deco lighthouse that the city just bought and that stands on the breakwater. What are your plans for the lighthouse, and where does that sit with your priorities for Port?
So having been on the council over the last 3 years, and we actually had a discussion at BPW last night, we've spent a lot of money on our breakwater leading out to the lighthouse, but we haven't spent money on the lighthouse at this point. I know I've had conversations with folks of what can we do, and we're working on what it's going to cost to do that. One initial estimate that I heard, and I don't necessarily know that this is factual, is $1 million to repaint it because there's lead-based paint and you're near the water and things like that. The lighthouse is iconic, and we need to ensure that it's maintained and it doesn't literally fall in the water due to disrepair. I know that the Friends of Park and Rec had picked up some of the activities had done previously with the Save the Lighthouse organization. I just don't know where they're at right now. I've heard that with the COVID pandemic, things got put on hold. But I do think that this is another thing that, I as mayor can find the right people to put together that have a passion for the lighthouse and make that repairs happen.
Ted.
I agree. I mean, it's embarrassing. And I think the problem is that we don't have a process in place to sustain our infrastructure through strategy. And I think that's a heavy lift for our current city administration to put those pieces into place. I had made a little banner for my Facebook page, and somebody said, "Can't you get a picture of the lighthouse without rust on it?" And you can't. It doesn't matter the angle. I think my experience is, raising funds and working with philanthropists in the region, we would be able to, again, create some sort of a coalition to get that lighthouse painted. If St. Mary's Church was falling apart, this community would rally because that's a focal point. The lighthouse is falling apart. We need to rally, and we need the leadership to get that done. I think the mayor's job is to be the ambassador, to bring those people together. And as we draw new residents to the community, the lighthouse is on everything. It's on Dan's mask. It's on our lighthouse. It's on our water tower. It's on our symbols. The worst thing we could do is just let that fall into disrepair. It is a symbol of our community. In so many ways, it has to be addressed.
Ted, again, I'm going to provide a little background.
Okay, if it's a cruise ship question, though, that just threw me totally off.
I promise it's not. This is in regards to the Niederkorn Library that's here in Port Washington. There are no study rooms for individuals or groups. The bathrooms need remodeling. Do you support a remodeled or new public library, and how would you make that happen?
Yes, I do. I used to, for a couple of years, my family, we lived right across the street from the Niederkorn's house, and we were a quarter block away from the library, and I spent most of my 6th and 7th grade summers at that library. I do believe that the library, again, moving into the 21st century that we're in, needs to start to reflect some of those pieces. Glass community centers, collaboration areas, strong technology. The architecture itself may not be able to support that. That library is a great reflection of a lot of things in Port Washington. We kind of peaked there at the end of the 60s, early 70s, our city halls, our water treatment plants, our library. And again, that's why I believe we're in a renaissance. We have the opportunity to invest heavily in that. I would look for very creative ways to get revenues, grants, going to the community, asking the question on infrastructural pieces, working with the Department of Public Instruction that oversees the libraries, looking at the federal level. And again, I sat on a library board, so I know how they're funded, and it's a critical piece. And if I didn't answer that question that way, my mother, who's the president of the library board, would chase me down.
Dan.
So, very relevant discussion. I think that our next council meeting, we're targeting to get an update on a study that's currently being done on the facility, the library facility, and what needs to be done to bring it up to ADA standards, to bring it up to the needs of our community in 2021 and beyond. I think once we get that study, work with Tom and the library staff on where do they see the future vision of that, and put together a design that makes sense for the future. I think our challenge would be, and Ted mentioned it, is how do we fund that? And honestly, that's a challenge across our city because a lot of our facilities are dated, not so much the buildings themselves, but the equipment inside them. And we've got some pretty significant challenges in our water plant and our wastewater plant. I'm not saying they're in trouble or by any means they're not safe, but there's DNR requirements that we need to address.
Dan, knowing the proposed location of the new firehouse and the sewage issues it includes, do you believe it is appropriate to install a holding tank system when they are not allowed for any other residents or businesses in the city?
So I guess first and foremost, there are holding tanks at other businesses in the city. And there are some at residents. Now, they're out in remote areas where there's not sewer access and it's cost prohibitive to bring extended out there. Whether we put a holding tank or we cooperate with Saukville, and I do think that we need to work closer with Saukville to address issues like this sewer going to the Shannon Farms. But I also think that we need to look at what's the right site. With the demise of the Casey's gas station and the corner of 33 and LL, there's an opportunity there, and there is sewer and water at that site. So, I don't know if it's the right spot exactly, but I do think we need to do something with a new facility for our fire and EMS teams.
Ted?
Yeah, I agree. I think the root of that issue is our relationship with Saukville and becoming very aggressive with, going to Saukville with an open hand and our hand out saying, what would it take? What conditions have to be met? I have, like Dan, I have those existing relationships with their village administrator and their current president. And I think it just goes to, as we begin to take a more regional approach to safety, fire safety, EMT services, ambulance responses, I think it needs to be looking at, again, the relationships with Grafton and Saukville, Cedarburg, Mequon, Belgium, Fredonia, Wabaca, and saying, where is that? That's a great site. There are some relationship pieces and some policy things and ordinances that are getting in the way. But I think it's a renewed focus of, like Dan said, when the studies come in and we look at those pieces, how do we create collaborative and cooperative services between the village of Saukville and the city of Port Washington? So it's not a question of can we have water or sewer or not, but more of a question of how's this going to benefit both communities?
Ted? The beer gardens have been very successful and an excellent draw for Port Washington. How do you feel about the proposed changes, and what kind of changes, if any, would you like to see made?
Well, I frequent that beer garden in the summer to support our local nonprofits and service clubs. I was not part of those original conversations and the problems that led up to those different strategies and solutions brought forward by Park and Rec. Now that I'm on the Park and Rec board and I'm watching that and listening to that, I believe that the strategy needs to take the problem to the problem. If we have compliance issues with service clubs and community groups because they don't fill out permits or don't get their insurance, et cetera, I think we need to bring that problem back to those groups, to their leadership, and then ask them, how would you solve this? I grow concerned when we punish all for the actions of one. As a teacher, I didn't yell at the whole class when one person made a mistake. And I think the opportunity is to really mentor the leadership in Park and Rec, to go to the people who are supporting that beer garden, help raise and build it, and then work with the Friends of Park and Rec to find a solution that is amicable. And instead of appeasing one or two people, go through and put together a process that is followed.
Dan?
So this is one that I've personally spent a lot of time talking with Kylie from our Park and Rec department about. She has done, I think, a phenomenal job of trying to collect all the issues and propose some changes that would address some of the issues. And I would say my understanding is majority of the issues are not so much with compliance because the pandemic just hit us last year. And so it's not necessarily about mask wearing or those kind of things, but it's about having fairness amongst the different groups that do host beer gardens, because there are good days and there are bad days. I think with that, the city council is going to be coming back and having a discussion next week about what that looks like with a revised proposal coming from the Friends of Park and Rec and the Park and Rec department. The cost of insurance, the opportunity to make money, that's what she was trying to really address.
Dan, what is the current status of the Blues Factory project, and what are your thoughts on that project?
You would need to talk to Gerchen on the status of the Blues Factory. He owns that property and he owns that project. I don't believe we've heard from him in quite some time, so I don't know the status of what his plans are relative to that. I love the idea of a concert venue like what he's being proposed. I don't care for the location. I would love to see that area turned into a graveled area with some facilities that would host our farmers market every Saturday, and also could be used for other events and activities. The city would have that back. But at this point, Gertchen owns it. I don't know what his plans are for it. I don't like the location for that. I've got other ideas for it.
Ted?
Yeah, I think it's the greatest idea, but the wrong place. The idea that we would have a center that would be a place that first highlighted the diverse history of the city of Port Washington and our support for blues and blues music and African-American artists across the country, that would be incredible. But in its current location, I think it was a bad deal from the onset. I'm not holding anyone, I'm not blaming anyone. Gertchen did what he did. He got the property, had the opportunity, but it is in his hands, as Dan pointed out, to decide what he'd like to do. I do think that there are a lot of people in Port Washington who would collaborate and work together to approach Gertchen to purchase that property back. And again, I would take on the role of being the ambassador and leading that charge. There are other great sites in Port Washington that would not be as disruptive as the community's access to our last resource and the last corner of that resource. Right now, to enjoy the lake, you have that spot. You've got the park to the south, the Coal Dock Park, but that quick access to the boats, to the marina, and all those different pieces, there should be opportunities there for fishermen, recreation, etc. So that's what I think.
Ted, what are your thoughts on reducing light pollution and possible plans to keep the night sky visible to those in Port and the surrounding community?
My plan? That's a great question because I just got an LED light in front of my house last night. And it was very noticeable. And not in a bad way. It was noticeable because we had the forever sulfur orange glow in our neighborhood, and now, our cul-de-sac was clearly and brightly lit. Safety's first, and being able to navigate our community and our streets in a safe manner is number one. The opportunity to reduce light pollution, et cetera, I think is strong, and with the current pieces in place, again. Safety's got to be the number one thing. This is a community on an interstate. There are options and opportunities, and all of our neighborhoods, regardless, need to be lit, and we need to make sure that people have the ability to see and be safe in their neighborhoods. Light pollution is something every major urban area does. I think there's strong strategies to do that, but the process that just went in place with the LED lights to reduce waste, costs, and energy was fantastic.
Dan.
And I agree with Ted. I mean, safety is the number one factor in this. Being able to walk the streets in the evening, especially during the wintertime when it's dark at 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, has got to be a priority. And so I think that's the challenge. I think having an opportunity where you can go up to Harrington Park or something like that, that's kind of remote and limited light on there, we need to encourage that. I had the opportunity to be up to the Dark Sky Park in Door County last summer. Unbelievable what you could see in the sky from something like that. But again, it's all about safety of those that live in our community.
We've come to that point where we need to kind of start tying things up, and I do have a number of other questions to ask. However, I'm going to ask one final question of each of you. Dan, are there any issues you'd like to discuss that we couldn't cover here tonight, given our time constraints?
I think that and I'll go back and I've seen postings on social media about some of our future developments here in Port Washington, and a lot of questions about where can we get cost-effective, and I'm sure still not 100% what cost-effective housing means, but I know it's not $1 million condo or $1 million house. That's not what I can afford, nor am I interested in that. I do think that we need to look at our zoning code, and there is plans to do that. I do think we need to look at our comprehensive plan based on our strategy and encourage developers. And it's really those folks that are developers that go out and purchase a piece of property, whether it's for redevelopment or development, and make it cost attractive to them to build affordable housing. And I'm not talking just apartments, I'm talking starter homes. And I think there's got to be a balance in our community on that as we go forwards. Thanks.
Ted.
I guess what I'd do is I'd like to reiterate, I think the city has an opportunity to very aggressively define our future, very aggressively define our zoning, determine what we want as a community, what the balance looks like, and how to plan for that. We are in control of our own destiny, and it's time the city takes it. Coming in and developing processes and making sure that we've got engagement and voice from the community, but at a point, the council is saying, like, this is what we want, this is balanced development. And as Dan had pointed out, Port Washington has a great opportunity here to not only just grow, as we move out, but grow from within, and the city can play a critical role in that attraction by becoming just a very customer-friendly, focused, zoned, strategic environment. And the last thing I'd want to say is we have to do something to support our police and fire, everything from wages to facilities to materials and safety. And I think we need to aggressively, as a city, come up annually with our own legislative platform that we look for the state to support us in the revenues to make sure that we have what we want to. I do not want to be in a position where the ambulance can't get to my house or my parents' house in a timely manner. Those would be mine.
We've come to the point in the forum where each candidate will have 2 minutes to summarize their positions. The closing statements will begin with Ted.
Well, thank you. And I'm probably most excited about that cruise ship question. Here's the deal. I've dedicated my life to service, and one of the pieces is I'm just excited for the opportunity for the voters to give me the potential to do that. One of the pieces is for Port Washington is I think we really need to navigate the renaissance that we're in and provide opportunities to become a premier community. I worry for our downtown businesses as we exit the pandemic here that Port Washington will create the conditions so that people will want to come here. I want the city to be in a position where people want to develop here, that they have good relationships, that they know we're friendly to investment. But at the same time, we have to keep a foot in the traditions in our past. And where I believe Port Washington can go under my leadership is that strategic, collaborative, engaged leadership where we're very clear on where we're headed, what we're doing, and we zone appropriately. But most importantly, that people know that this is a place they can come to. And I can provide that leadership. One of the pieces as we close out here is I just want to thank the local businesses and my friends and family for their support. As you pointed out in the beginning, when you decide to step into the arena of local politics, it gets interesting, and Dan serving on the council, me in the council in the 90s, you go out to dinner and you put yourself in a position where you have to justify and defend a lot of things. And I appreciate that leadership, and I wanted to thank Mayor Becker for his service to the community. I'd ask that if you have more questions about us or me, follow me on my Facebook page, the Knightsky for Mayor Facebook page. And finally, I just want to thank everyone for putting this on. And remember to vote April 6th or in your early voting. And please consider me to be your candidate.
Dan, you have 2 minutes.
So I want to thank the League of Women Voters and Niederkorn Library for setting up this forum. I want to thank everyone that's watching and for your spending your time tonight listening to Ted and I comment on your questions. I appreciate your support and trust. My family moved to Port Washington 13 years ago. Like most families, we've fallen in love with this community. The schools, the shopping, the dining, and the opportunities. I'm honored and proud to be serving on the City Council for the past 3 years. I'm proud of what we've accomplished. I'm excited for the opportunity to lead Port Washington as your mayor. Together, we'll continue many of the initiatives that we've started, and we'll begin to take on many initiatives that we plan for the future. I understand what it takes to ensure public safety, provide outstanding programs for our citizens, encourage development, and address the challenges in front of us as we provide critical city services. Port Washington is a unique Wisconsin community along Lake Michigan. I will do whatever is needed to celebrate and embrace this as your mayor. I want to see the city partner with surrounding communities, the school district, local businesses, and local organizations to enrich our community. I want to see the day when the city of Port Washington is considered the benchmark for its focus on diversity and inclusion. I want every citizen to know that they can learn more about what is going on in local government and provide input on local government decisions and directions. Working with our city administrator and city staff, I know we'll make this happen, and that is why I want to be your mayor. I have the time, the diverse professional experience, the partnering skills, and the drive to make this happen. Again, thank you for your time today.
This concludes our forum for this evening. We hope that this forum has given you, the voters, the information that will help you cast an educated vote on April 6th for the mayor of the city of Port Washington. We thank the candidates for giving us their time and their thoughts this evening. We thank the public for providing us with the questions. We thank the library and we thank the League of Women Voters, for organizing the questions. We had many more issues we could have touched upon tonight. Unfortunately, time was not our friend tonight. Thank you and have a good evening.